I've been asked here today to provide a brief introduction to Wizard Education's Successful Futures for All programme that HEFCU funded over the past 2 years until September 2019. The work added value to the research on Welsh Government's existing evaluation of the progress of pioneer schools in developing the new 3 to 15 curriculum. We are pleased that the research has led to a range of insights, including the curriculum development process, challenges teachers and schools will face, and the potential benefits to all learners. The findings also identified key and interesting bits of research that the work could use for further research and consideration, and to ensure that all learners fully benefit from the reforms. The Hub project was supported by 5 partner projects and led by researchers across all universities across Wales. This has provided us with an important and exciting opportunity to see firsthand the benefits of working collaboratively across different sectors, including higher education. We welcomed the opportunity to build capacity for research in universities across Wales, which could allow for a broader set of researchers to conduct the work and build resilience for future research. We are also encouraged that the work is intended to lead to further opportunities for Wizard Education and for them to explore in the future, and we wish them the best of luck with this research. I'll now pass you along to my colleague Nigel Newton, who will provide you a bit more about the project.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks very much for having us here today to share something about the research which we've conducted. And as Savannah has said, there are 2 principal aims of the research. One was in terms of capacity building in HEIs, and the other with respect to actually looking at how the new curriculum is being developed. What I'm going to focus on presenting is some of the findings from the main Hub project which I was involved in. This was at Hub and Spokes, so each of the spokes were looking at different aspects of disadvantage and looking at different kinds of schools, and they were informed by the research that I was doing, which was more of an overview of teachers in pioneer schools and the pioneer leads. And equally, their insights and findings helped shape the content of the survey, which we administered to over 600 teachers. Now, I'm presenting the kind of nitty-gritty of what some of the things which we found here, because as you'll be aware, the new curriculum has lots of different components to it, and it's easy to look at those in isolation. It's easy to explore each of these things, how they might be worked out, what might work effectively, how schools are doing that effectively. But at the end of the day, the teachers in the schools are in a much more complex environment. The teachers in the classroom are in that black box of the classroom, which is with the interactions with the pupils, and sometimes it's very hard to get to see, well, what are their perceptions of it. So really I'm thinking about as well, teachers as researchers, what are some of the questions which they could learn or they could arrive at from thinking about some of the findings which we've which we've seen in this project, and also what is the context that new teachers are going into in schools preparing to develop the new curriculum. Now, these sorts of questions and this approach which I'm presenting now is in response in part to a misconception which I think sometimes there is about the curriculum, that it's almost like an instruction manual. You just have to follow the instructions and the bookcase is assembled. When, in actual fact, I like to think of the new curriculum, and in a sense our researchers emphasise this afresh, as cooking. You might have a recipe, but that recipe only becomes something of significance and purpose in satisfying a need when cooks put those ingredients together, serve it up, and present it in a particular environment. And obviously the benefits of that dish will be different depending on how you're going to evaluate it. So your Uncle Igby might just want a satisfying comfort food, but somebody else training for the marathon might want something a little bit different. So we have these components, and thinking them through is something which, or thinking how they interact, is something which we ought to bear in mind. And the kind of this will be reflected in some of the findings which I'll present in a minute. So one of the things which helped us to get or to approach the research in the way in which we did was to kind of look in the Pioneer Kitchen, was research on reforms in New Zealand by Claire Sinema, whose work highlighted that in terms of effective reform, you have to have change of practice at the end. Now, what leads to that change of practice? Well, she traced back to the quality of support. But between the quality of support, which you might be able to sort of measure, are teachers supported, and what ways are they supported? Is that support good? And therefore, does it influence changes to practice? You have these two attitudinal elements in the middle. One is regard, viewing that the changes are positive, they're going to be a benefit to the pupils and to the teachers. And the other is confidence in the teacher's capacity to deliver those reforms, and confidence that the reforms will be beneficial. So these two elements were the two bits in the middle, in a sense, are the two parts that we were looking at. And in order to maybe predict what might happen in terms of practice, because there's not been a lot of practice yet, change, but also to begin to evaluate, well, what is the quality of support at the moment for Pioneer teachers. So this was a mixed method study involving interviews to begin with Pioneer leads and teachers in 10 schools, and those were schools with a higher proportion of pupils eligible for free school meals. And then from that, and from analysis of those interviews, and in conversation with our partner researchers on the other projects, we also put together a survey which was administered across Wales to teachers in Pioneer schools. We've got over 80 schools represented here, and lots of different kinds of teachers, which is important. So the survey data allowed us to see the perspectives of over 153 senior management in schools, 72 Pioneer leads, but the largest majority were classroom teachers. But then we were also able to distinguish between the Pioneer leads, those who are working closely with them to develop parts of the new curriculum, and those teachers in Pioneer schools who actually had no involvement in the Pioneer work. Now this is really important because, as you'll be aware, if you're following the progress of as I'm sure you are, of the new curriculum, that depending on who you talk to, you'll probably hear a perspective framed by that support that those teachers have received. So people working most closely to the development process, people, the Pioneer leads in particular, have a different view of things from other teachers. But we know that this reform, in a couple of years' time, all teachers are going to need to embrace and deal with. So, and work out. So trying to unravel what their perspective is, it was particularly important to us, given the fact that they're in schools where we might expect them to have a little bit, be further along the line in terms of their preparing for the new curriculum. So, as you might imagine, so we asked some straightforward questions, and as you might imagine, the more involved a teacher was in the curriculum development, the better informed they were. So 93% of pioneer leads said they were considerably informed, and this figure drops to about 39% for teachers in pioneer schools who didn't have a particular role in the development of the curriculum. Now, there's no hard or fast rule as to what level of involvement triggers a need to be informed. But that's a question which, in a sense, ought to be pondered. Yeah, what is it where teachers are going to think, okay, now my level of involvement is such that I need to be informed, to shift that equation? Now, if you think of the curriculum as it is today, the one we're moving away from, then teachers in schools across the country having to teach new courses, new topics each year. So teaching things differently is one thing, which many teachers are quite prepared for. But this curriculum requires something different of them, doesn't it? So well, I'll leave that thought with you, and let's try to unravel it a little bit more. So we dug a little bit deeper into, and at this point, I'll put up both of those. At this point, the draft versions of the What Matters statements have been available for a couple of months. So not the final version, the version that we've got currently available, but the draft version. And what we can see here is that though the percentages in terms of familiarity look relatively similar on the left-hand side here, you see no specific involvement, is slightly higher. If we take out those teachers who have said they weren't familiar, and we ask them about whether they're happy, what we see here is that we have a considerable increase in the only somewhat happy rather than very happy. In fact, 1 in 10 who are involved but not pioneer leads are unhappy. 1 in 5 who are not involved at all are unsure. Now, it would be easy to kind of overlook this perception in the general sense of positiveness. But there is a kind of, I don't know if any of you have a kind of linguistic background. You know the thing. You say to somebody on the street, how are you doing? And they say, fine, thanks. Now, if you stop them, you say, but yeah, you look a little bit pale, right? Then they start telling you, well, I actually had sore throat for a week and I'm on antibiotics, right? And if you put your arm around them and say, oh, come and have a cup of tea with me, they'll probably tell you about their visits to the doctor and everything else. So there is a sense in which, with this, what we try to do with the survey data is to get beyond simply, do you like the idea of the new curriculum? These parts of the new curriculum. To drill down, well, what about this part? What about that part? And what we found, and that was prompted because in the interviews, the more we questioned, okay, so how about the What Matters statements? How about the progression steps? Questions were raised. Now, that's not to say that overall there isn't confidence or support for the reforms, but those questions became more sharper and in need of being addressed more carefully. Now, one of the things which we know from the interviews was really perhaps underscores why there's this uncertainty coming in here, is that the pioneer leads all told us about what a journey they've been on. What a positive journey of professional development that they've had in the 18 to 2 years of their involvement in pioneer work, and how that had resulted in what they described almost universally as a mindset change, where they suddenly saw themselves in a different role, having a different relationship to curriculum, a different relation to pedagogy. But as they reflected on that, so too they reflected on, well, actually, we've had this quite intensive training and support which has resulted in this mindset change, which makes us confident. How are our colleagues going to experience that? Will our colleagues need to experience something as intensive to get to a place where they feel equally confident? So, in a sense, the importance of this can be underscored by, if we, again, coming back to looking at more specific questions about the new curriculum. Here, so we asked, well, in what respect will groups of pupils be will your different groups be benefited from aspects of the new curriculum? And what you can see here is that there's a significant number ranging from 41 to 24% who are still unsure, and that peaks with respect to subject-specific knowledge, where there's a lot of uncertainty about the loss of that. Now, we know, and what's interesting here is that there's no significant difference between teachers at primary and at secondary in this concern. Because one of the sort of assumptions which we heard before we began is that, well, primary are going to find the interdisciplinary nature of the new curriculum easier to handle because they're already doing this. Well, that wasn't really what came out from the survey data. But they're equally concerned about some aspects of the curriculum. Now, we don't have the answers to what that really is. That's research that needs to be done in the classroom. That's the further research which Savannah was referring to, that needs to get into the classroom and see, well, exactly what does that mean? But it is significant for us to bear in mind when we're thinking about teachers in the classroom and this confidence and regard for the new curriculum. Because if at anything, you would hope that there would be a belief that this new curriculum would benefit different groups of pupils. And yet what we found here was that in actual fact, no group where we presented this question, which groups would be benefited, no majority of teachers thought that any group would be benefited. And the group where we were particularly focusing on are pupils from more disadvantaged backgrounds. Under a third of teachers thought that they would be benefited. Now, again, how do you square this with what we've heard in terms of positive things about the potential of the new curriculum to help all kinds of pupils? Well, so we broke down this data here, and I realise it's a lot of bars. The ones to look at are the royal blue ones and the grey ones, the ones which stand out. Now, those are SMTs who are not pioneer leads in schools with medium or high numbers of free school meal pupils eligible for free school meals. And they're significantly more positive about the potential benefits of the new curriculum than classroom teachers and from teachers in schools with the lower numbers. Now, why is that? Well, we don't have a definitive answer, but I'll suggest that it's in part because one of the things which came out throughout the data was that this new curriculum wasn't what we've currently got. And what we've currently got, lots of teachers just don't like. And head teachers don't like it because in those schools with higher numbers of pupils eligible for free school meals, because they tend to underperform. So this is just nothing more than a hope that actually we won't be judged in the same way. There'll be a more equal playing field. And again, that's problematic because that's how one group of teachers, the senior managers in the schools, are thinking about things, but it's not what their colleagues. So we've got a leadership challenge here. And in terms of doing research, in terms of preparing teachers to go into schools developing the curriculum, how do we help them navigate these perhaps mixed messages about the new curriculum? So, more briefly, I just want to draw attention to some of the some of the other data that we pulled together, both from pulling together data from the Hub projects with questions which were open-ended questions that we asked in the survey data, and we analysed. And these are hopes and fears. And there's just a group of hopes and fears which I think, again, help explain some of the messages, some of the things which we might be hearing about the development of the new curriculum that we should be aware of. So one of them is this hope of greater focus on skills and employability, viewed both in terms of vocationally related skills, technical learning, and also more real-life content. And that was also felt to be a way in which we could help develop personal competencies in pupils, things like critical thinking or creativity. Another element, another hope, which came up a lot, was that the curriculum would provide, that the core elements of the curriculum would be beneficial to learners, and that those core elements, particularly the 4 purposes, provided the ground upon which teachers could exercise the flexibility which they desire. Now, there's just one thing which we'll say about this, because the core elements, the 4 purposes, again, it's worth bearing in mind how difficult they are to evaluate. I haven't yet come across a school who has said to me how they're going to evaluate how their effectiveness in delivering and providing opportunities along the lines of the 4 purpose, how they're going to evaluate whether their pupils are more healthy, more ambitious, and the like. So that leads us on to the 2 of the fears. So the first fear that teachers, or the most commonly mentioned fear that teachers had, was with respect to accountability. Qualifications and accountability wouldn't change. Now, I think that when we conducted the research, that we hadn't heard anything about changes to qualifications, and obviously I think some teachers' fears would be partially addressed by what we're hearing from Qualifications Wales about the proposals for new qualifications. But there is definitely this strong sense of which those systems, those measuring of our performance need to change, and if they don't, then the curriculum itself is going to run into trouble. The problem with this fear too is that if teachers get what they want with respect to assessment, so we ask them about what assessment they think would be necessary in order to deliver the curriculum effectively, then it's greater flexibility on their part upon how pupils are assessed. And also having fewer exams and more reporting based on teachers' observations. Now that is another role which teachers would have to take on board, which currently they're not having to. So we're again asking of our teachers a big change in actually how they view their role, and one of which, well, we can ask whether we're preparing them for that another time. And that leads, though, to this other concern, which is, I touched on before, which is, well, what happens here with respect to subject-specific knowledge, and will pupils be able to progress in the same way? And again, underlying those concerns is this sense of which, if you have greater flexibility, how do you have consistency? Will all pupils have equal access to the same levels of knowledge? So, if that isn't enough, here are of sort of like things which came out of this research. One of the other issues is just the language which we use. And if we're helping as well teachers do research, then being mindful that language can be used in different ways. is really important. So because we've had things like child-centred mean on the one hand we're pupils deciding what they study, and on the other hand actually we as teachers teaching what we think is more child-centred, is more engaging for children. Relevance. For some teachers that was just a more Welsh perspective, a more local context for content. And for others it's this increased vocational options. Pupils can achieve, everybody wants pupils to achieve, but again, for some, it's different pathways to gain qualifications, and for others, it means not missing out on that subject-specific knowledge. As one of the teachers said to me after a presentation that I gave, flexibility might mean, for me, be teaching more traditionally than I've been allowed to now, whereas my colleague wants to teach in a more progressive way, in inverted commas. So, just to wrap up then, there are these tensions, which we need to work through. School and teacher flexibility, but avoiding variability, change to assessment in keeping with the reforms, successful progression to post-16 and employment, benefits of a broader curriculum that is more child-centred, but pupils not missing out on that on subject-specific knowledge. And perhaps a way in which one of the things which came out, and I'll kind of leave on this note, one of the things which came out is that there needs to be a clearer sense of coherence, perhaps for teachers, between the aims, the content and experiences, the pedagogy and the assessment. And maybe that will, we'll get to that point, but if we don't, then I think that some of those doubts and concerns which teachers have will persist, and that's problematic and difficult. So anyway, so that's some of the findings. Oops. And thank you for your time.
I just say 10 out of 10 for timekeeping as well on that one. That's an excellent start. Certainly lots of messages that you've shared with us today are very familiar to me as I've been talking to teachers up and down Wales as well. And there are different perspectives and different tensions. And it's how you bring everybody together to that common understanding. So that work was very, very valuable, I would think. We do have around about 5 minutes for a quick question. So if you're happy to take questions, is that okay? Okay. Anybody? Yes, one from Jane.
Hi, thank you, Nigel. I found that really interesting. Can I just ask about the timing of when you undertook the survey, and is there an intention to redo the survey with a similar cohort, if possible, given that we've now had a first iteration of the curriculum, and there will then, in a few months' time, be a second iteration of the curriculum?
So the survey was conducted last year, between October and December.
So prior to the first iteration of the
yeah.
And do you think that will happen? I'm just interested in whether you think there'll be changes now we've had that first iteration.
I think so. I think some of those concerns, some of those perspectives will have been addressed. But in actual fact, I think that some of the fears will also be confirmed. So whether you actually see a greater polarisation, maybe it's of a smaller group of teachers with those persistent concerns, it would be very interesting to rerun it, actually. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Really interesting stuff. But you mentioned, you and Susanna mentioned that you were the hub and there was a network. I'd be really interested to know some of the sorts of projects that are also going on amongst the colleagues who are working with Wizard in terms of capacity development.
Yes, that would, and in a sense, one of the dilemmas which I had here, because they couldn't be. They're all teaching, so they're all at this moment in time, at this hour. So I was sort of like, do I talk more about their research or just focus on what I know more. So we had one colleague was looking at the digital competency framework, and particularly the issue to do with resourcing. One colleague was looking at rural schools. Are they going to, in what way is the new curriculum more or less of a challenge for them and the kind of opportunities? Another colleague was looking at ALN pupils alongside the ALN reforms and what teachers' expectations are with respect to the new curriculum and those groups of learners. Another colleague was looking at the expressive arts, AOLE, and how that was being developed and the kind of challenges for teachers in taking that particular curriculum area on board. And the last colleague was looking at a particular intervention in schools, mindfulness, being used under the umbrella of health and well-being. So they were all kind of very interested, yeah, and that was in a school with high numbers of pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. So whether it was gave an opportunity to address.
Now you're able to work together. Are these,
yeah.
So how's that working?
So in a sense, one of the things which we were doing was supporting each other in terms of the research design. So they came with those initial ideas based on their teacher training backgrounds and those particular interests. So it was about work in the hub. We were supporting the research design and then informing. When they got going on the field work, they provided us with insights as well, which helped shape some of the items and helped us gauge whether what we had found by a more general perspectives of the teachers were valid, whether they made sense. Yeah.
One last one?
Yeah, just to comment really, because Owen Davis is the guy from Bangor doing that project on the digital competencies. And I think it's a really interesting idea of the sort of the hub thing. And I think Owen we were planning to have Owen talk in our Curie bit on his project, but obviously he's teaching and can move things around for him. But one of the things I think Owen's found really helpful is that sort of support, because essentially what the project's done is helped Owen and the team get together and go through their project, and they've had support from Wizard. At this point, you're on the writing stages of the manuscripts.
Yeah, so the reports will be out in a couple of weeks, and he's writing a paper. Yeah, and we've all written a paper for at least one.
And we're thinking, hopefully, within the whole new research within the team staff, that's the start of his PhD journey, if you know.
Okay.